Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a lot of stuff to talk about, including some discussion about the USA basketball roster, whether or not it is the best they have ever put together, going over the comparisons between this and the 1992 Dream Team, as well as 2008 and 2012's stacked rosters, with a lot of similar players on both of those as they have today. We're also going to go over some new news coming out about Paul George and his contract, discussions between him and the Clippers, how he ended up with the 76ers as opposed to finishing off his career in LA like he said he wanted to. Also, Cade Cunningham getting his contract, Zach Edey having an incredible debut for the Memphis Grizzlies in his summer league game against Walker Kessler and the Jazz. We're also going to talk a little bit about MLB and the New York Yankees. They continue to struggle through the last just about month. They've gone 6-16 since June 13th. So we'll talk about all of that and more coming up in just 1 second. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show today with a question. Simple question. Is this the best USA basketball roster ever? And you might look at me, and when I first had this question posed to me, I was like, no, they have a dream team, right? But you go slot by slot, right? And we can go and compare this, right? We'll start off with the dream team here. You know, you have Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Christian Laettner, John Stockton, David Robertson, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin, Clyde Drexler, Karl Malone, Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley, and of course Michael Jordan, right? And you compare that to today's roster, which equally as impressive in a lot of aspects. You know, you've got Steph Curry, you've got Anthony Davis, you've got Bam Adebayo, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Anthony Edwards, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Halliburton, Drew Holiday, LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, and Jason Tatum, right? This is, when you're just comparing these rosters head to head, it's a kind of good comparison, right? Now, obviously, one of the biggest differences when you're looking at these two rosters, and really this roster compared to a lot of the quote-unquote best rosters the USA has ever sent to the Olympics, the Dream Team 08 and 2012, you know, what really stands out to you is the age of these players, right? There are 7 guys on this current 2024 US roster that are over the age of 30 or older, right? When you look back on the Dream Team, there were just 4 guys, right? There were just 4. You had basically retired Larry Bird, Clyde Drexler at 30, John Stockton at 30, and Magic Johnson, who had retired at this point at 32, right? And you look at, you know, the 08-2012 rosters, the 08 roster especially was incredibly young. You had 35-year-old Jason Kidd, but no one else over 30. And when you get to 2012, you know, it's a lot of the same guys. You had a 33-year-old Kobe, but that's it. That's the only one that was over 30 in that roster. So that's one of those things that you compare this roster, and maybe you say, hey, you have the combination of the greatest shooter of all time in Steph Curry, along with some of the best defenders we've ever seen in Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo, some of the greatest scorers and shot creators we've seen together, LeBron James, Kevin Durant. This is absolutely a stacked roster. But, when you're looking at these guys, a lot of them are a little bit past their prime, to be completely honest with you, right? This is, I mean, as good as LeBron and Steph Curry and Anthony Davis are, they're not in their prime, or Kevin Durant, you can throw in that conversation as well. This is not the prime versions of them. This is not prime Kevin Durant. This is not prime LeBron James. This is not prime Kawhi Leonard. You do have probably prime Jason Tatum here, prime Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker, but you don't have the biggest names on this teams. The biggest names on these teams aren't in their prime. Uh, back in '08, you can make the '08 you have, prime LeBron James. 2012 you have prime LeBron James. You've Kobe Bryant. These who was a little bit past his prime in 2012 there, but still, you had these legends of the game in their prime there. And I'm not going to sit here and say that this roster is worse, because top to bottom, when you go depth wise, this is probably still the deepest roster that there has been, right? You can go onto the dream team. This isn't a team that has any, amateur players. The dream team had Christian Laettner, who, as good as he was still a college player at the time. This is a team that's full of NBA talent, NBA legends. You go back to that 2008 team, they have Tayshaun Prince on the roster. And again, he's really good, but Tayshaun Prince, when you compare to, who is the least impressive name on this roster, probably Drew Holiday, maybe Tyrese Halliburton. It's just this team here is so much deeper than really any other one. So if you want to go, shot for shot with any other team, this probably has the best depth of any I want to say all-star team, but of any USA basketball roster that they've put together. But as far as it being the best ever, it's a little hard to put in that conversation, because a majority of these guys are past their prime. Like I said, 7 of them are 30 or older, and of those guys that are 30 and older, only Joel Embiid, you could probably say, is still in his prime. You're not going to sit here and tell me LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, Drew Holiday, Kevin Durant, you're not going to sit here and tell me Steph Curry and all those guys are still in their prime. I can see the argument for Anthony Davis maybe still being in his prime, but even that, I think, really isn't that true. Like I said, 7 guys out 30 years or older is what is kind of holding this back. And I mean, look, 15, 20 years from now, people are going to look at this roster and they're going to be like, wow, this might have been the best collection of basketball players that we put together, right? And this probably is number 2 behind that dream team. But if you're taking out some of the context of the ages of these guys, and again, all of these guys deserve to be on this roster. It's not like they're old and can't play against some of this great competition that they're getting out of Canada, out of France, which this is going to be the best competition that they've ever gone up against, which is why they're assembling a super team for this USA basketball run. And maybe, hopefully, it can continue, because it's always fun when you get the best players from all of the world to participate in the Olympic Games. But, this isn't the best team, just because these guys aren't in their prime. All these other teams, the 2008, the 2012 team, then the Dream Team, the 1992 team, they had prime players, right? Their players were in their prime. This just doesn't have that, and because of that, I can't sit here and say that this is the best team, the best U.S. team that they've put together of all time. But that's just my thoughts. Again, just on paper, it's probably the deepest, but I don't think it's the best because these guys aren't at their personal bests. Or the vast majority of them. If it was just LeBron that was 40 years old at this point playing in it, yes. But the fact of the matter that more than half of them are over 30 is a little bit concerning to me. But anyway, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. Is this the best roster USA basketball has ever put together? If not, which one is? Let me know in the comments. But in the next segment here, we're going to move off of USA basketball back into the NBA. There's been a couple of contract discussions that is either breaking news from today or we have not gone over in the last couple of days since the weekend, since July 4th. We're going to go over that. We're going to start off with Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham signs a max extension to stay with the Detroit Pistons. We'll talk about that, what the future might look like in Detroit now that Cade Cunningham is locked up for the foreseeable future, as well as Paul George in the next segment, what his comments were. He was on a podcast talking about what the negotiations were like with the Los Angeles Clippers before deciding to ultimately sign with the Philadelphia 76ers. So stick around for all of that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just gone over the question, is this current iteration of USA basketball roster, the one they're sending to the Olympics, the greatest ever put together? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Go ahead and throw that in the comments. But in this segment here, we're going to move out of international basketball back to the good old American NBA. National Basketball Association had some new contracts given out, including one with Cade Cunningham signing a max rookie extension to stay with the Pistons, along with a couple of other guys signing some max rookie extensions we'll get to in this segment. We'll talk about if it was a good move for these teams and what it means for the future of the Pistons, of the Magic, and a couple other spots. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with the message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some new contracts given out here in the NBA. Cade Cunningham signs a rookie max deal, 5 years, $247 million that could be worth up to $269 million to stay with the Detroit Pistons. And you can look at this in a couple of different ways, right? First way, you could look at it is, negative. Why are the Pistons giving out a $200 million contract when they're the worst team in the NBA. To which I say no. That's the wrong way to look at it, right? Cade Cunningham, for despite playing on the worst team in the NBA, right? Despite playing for the Detroit Pistons, getting a new coach every single year that he's been in the pros, aside from the year he was, including the year he was hurt, he's averaged 22, 4, and 7. He's eighth in the top 10 in the league in assists per game last season, top 20 in points per game. This is a guy that you want on your roster. This is a guy that you can absolutely build around. And I think that's kind of a no-brainer for anyone that's been paying attention to the NBA. Cade Cunningham is a star in the making. He is only going to continue to get better. I mean, you look at his shooting percentage from his first 3 full years from his first 3 years in the NBA. Obviously, he was hurt in his second year in 2022, 2023. But I guess from his first 2 years in the NBA, he's gotten a huge increase in field goal percentage. 3% up from his rookie season. 3-point percentage has gone up by 4% since his rookie season. His free throw percentage has gone up. He just continues to show improvements. I mean, you want to talk about his passing. His passing, again, it's going to only improve when he gets in a better system for him, in a system that, is going to be better spaced out, which has kind of been part of the Pistons' issue. He is going to get more shooters on the outside, and they didn't necessarily help that too much this offseason. But still, you go out and you get a guy like like Ron Holland. He could develop into something that could be more helpful on the outside there. His passing numbers have gone up by almost 2 assists a game since his rookie season. If you look at just about every single metric, he has improved constantly throughout his career with the Pistons. And again, that is with a lot of change, a lot of turmoil. He hasn't been able to help set a culture. There's been a new coach every single year he's been there, and that's not going to change this year, right? This isn't a new trend. He still gets a new coach. The Pistons have done their best to bring in some shooting this offseason. They overpay for Tobias Harris, give him a two-year, $52 million deal, which, with where the Pistons are, it doesn't really matter that they're giving out a short-term, high-money deal like that. They bring in Paul Reed just as of a couple minutes ago. But building around Cade Cunningham is the right move, and it shows direction with this franchise, a franchise that's kind of been directionless for a very, very long time. And if they're able to build around a guy like Cade Cunningham, if they're able to build an offense that's suited to him, this is something that's huge. And I love this move for the Pistons. And I'd be shocked if there was any kind of negativity around this deal, to be completely honest with you. A max deal that's kind of been on the other side of the spectrum. Another rookie max, Franz Wagner, with the Orlando Magic. He gets himself a max rookie deal over the weekend. And while we were talking about how, the Pistons kind of needed to build around Cade Cunningham, the Magic have a couple of other options that they can build around. And that's not to say that Franz Wagner isn't a good NBA player, right? You average 19, 5, and 3 last season. Again, he's another guy that has continued to improve every single year that he's been in the NBA. He's got a great track record of being healthy, shooting 48% from the field last season on, basically 5 threes a game. As much as his 3-point shooting went down. I mean, that might have been an outlier. You look at his first couple seasons, he shot 35, 36% from 3, dropped down to 28% this last season, but the volume went up. And if he can improve and rebound, this isn't going to be a bad signing for them, right? It's a lot of money to give to a guy in Franz Wagner who doesn't really feel like the focal point of your team, right? I feel like the idea of a max extension is to give it to the centerpieces of your team. You have Paolo Banchero there. You have Franz Wagner, you have, a couple guys that helped build the culture that helped, be the core of this Magic team that was, you know, a good shooting performance on the road away from advancing to the second round of the finals last season, right? Now, honestly, you could argue they probably were the better team in that first round matchup against the Cavaliers. They just didn't have that shooting. They bring in KCP this season. That should, in theory, help with that a little bit. But you look at a guy in Franz Wagner and you give him a max extension. And I know the Magic have money to play with right now, but you don't want to get into a situation like the Wizards were in a couple years ago. You had a young team that, looked like it was really promising, led by Bradley Beal, John Wall, and I know it kind of fell off the rail with injuries more than overpaying some of these guys. But you also have to be careful with who you're giving these max extensions to, because that is a lot of money to be tied into in the future, right? Franz Wagner is a guy that if his 3-point shooting especially can rebound to where it was his first 2 years in the league, this will turn out to be a good contract because he'll be able to space the floor. He'll be able to play that good defense that the Magic predicated their success on this last season. But he stepped into a little bit of a bigger role this last year, right? Going from playing 30 minutes a game up to 34 minutes a game, right? A little bit of a bigger role from seasons past. And his 3-point shooting wasn't at the same level that you want it to be at, right? Uh, this is still a guy that was really solid, even though, and really was the entire Magic team that couldn't shoot threes. The addition of KCP should be good. Right now, this isn't going to be an issue, and keeping your guys that you develop in house, I think, is super important to making a successful team. Right? You look at the Celtics, for instance; they built most of that on their own, right? But Franz Wagner is a guy that you scream $200 million and it just doesn't sound right. It just him. He got an extension. Again, I kind of do understand it from a Magic point of view. You might as well lock in the guy that you want to commit to long term. You don't want to disrespect him. We'll talk about a team uh, that disrespected a star next in our next segment, or that made a star feel disrespected in the next segment with Paul George and the Clippers, actually. But you don't want to get in that situation where relationships are tied or severed because a player feels you know disrespected. That's an important thing when you're doing these negotiations. You don't want to sell them too short. And they understand it's a business, right? They understand that. But when you have that max dangling in front of you and you just kind of want to get it done, you have the cap space to get it done. You don't have to worry about this for at least another couple seasons when you're going to have to pay guys like Banchero, like Suggs. It doesn't hurt now. But 2 seasons from now, we might be looking at this contract like, hey, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And we might be doing the same thing with Scotty Barnes, right? He signed his rookie max probably about a month ago at this point. But I do understand why these teams are giving out the rookie max. Uh, they I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I do think that there are better ways around it. Overall, Cade Cunningham, good signing, love it. Franz Wagner, excuse me. Iffy on that one, but I don't necessarily hate it. Hate it. But anyway, in our next segment, like I said, we are going to talk about Paul George. There was an interview that came out him on a podcast talking about how negotiations went with him and the Clippers and why he ultimately decided to leave and join up with Joel Embiid and the 76ers in the offseason. So we'll talk about that. Who's in the right on this one, and much more surrounding that situation. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking all about Cade Cunningham, Franz Wagner signing rookie max extensions, whether or not it was good for the future of their teams. In this segment here, we're going to continue with some NBA talk a little bit about Paul George and his situation. He obviously leaves the Clippers this offseason, signs a max extension, $212 million to go and play with, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and the Philadelphia 76ers, as opposed to staying in LA and playing with the Clippers. He shined some insight on a podcast interview talking about what the negotiation process was like between him and the front office of the Los Angeles Clippers. We'll talk all about that, who was in the right, and get a little more in depth on that situation. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Paul George situation. We talked all about the idea of players feeling disrespected, right, in our last segment with Franz Wagner. And this is basically what Paul George was saying. He felt disrespected by the Clippers in their negotiations, right? He talks on a podcast here. He says, the original offer was for 2 years, $60 million. And, if you have no context here, you say, hey, 2 years, $60 million sounds like a lot to me, but you have to have this in the context of he could have signed a deal worth over he did just sign a deal worth over $200 million, right? So, instead of getting that extra 140, the original offer was 60 million. The original offer was only 60 million. So they're basically cutting his salary in like a quarter at that point, right? Not the situation you want to be in if you're Paul George. You're saying, "Hey, I'm one of the best players in the NBA. A little more money, please," right? I need a little more than $30 million a year, right? And totally reasonable, right? I completely understand that. He says then it's a long, drawn-out process to get it up to $50 million per year, 3 years, 150. He says it takes months and months to get it up to there. Again, I don't understand why the Clippers were so hesitant. You can point to injury history. He wasn't fully healthy for most of the season before. He missed a bunch of games, but this season he was completely healthy. And at this point, he says, let's take a break until the offseason, right? Here, Kawhi Leonard gets offered a contract. He says, hey, I'll take whatever Kawhi wants. I'll take whatever you gave Kawhi. And they say, all right, 3 years, 150. And he says, okay, I'm fine with this. I'm fine with taking a $60 million pay cut, but I do want to have a no trade clause in there because I'm taking less money. I want to know that I'm going to stay in LA, which is a reasonable request, right? This is a request that, it makes sense. You can get more money elsewhere, as shown in free agency. He gets a $200+ million deal to go to Philly. Excuse me. He says, "Hey, I'm willing to take a pay cut here. I'm willing to stay in LA, but I just want an assurance that I'm going to be in LA, that I'm not going to take less money and then end up on some random team halfway across the country that I didn't get to choose." Right? And that sounds reasonable. No trade clauses are a lot more popular in the other other three major American sports, right? In football, they happen a lot more. They happen a lot more in hockey and in baseball, right? That these no trade clauses, or at least limited no trade clauses are baked into these contracts. But in the NBA, there's only two, and one of them was on LeBron James's contract this most recent season. So before LeBron James signed his new contract, there was only one player in the NBA that had this no trade clause in his contract, right? So Clippers are looking at that and they're saying, to be honest, I don't know why they don't take that deal, right? The Clippers are kind of, and we talked about the future of this Clippers team not too long ago, but maybe a week or two ago. We talked about how they're kind of rudderless. They're kind of spinning in circles. They're moving into a new arena. They want to compete, but their roster is not able to compete right now. This Clippers roster, especially without Paul George, is kind of in a spot where they don't have the juice they need in a Western Conference that continues to get better while they get worse, right? You have the Kings making a move for DeMar DeRozan. You have the Thunder making a move for for Alex Caruso. You have the Pelicans bringing in DeJounte Murray. You have all these. You have the Spurs bringing in Chris Paul. All these teams are getting better, while the Clippers are just at best this offseason. We're treading water. And the Mavericks. They brought in Klay Thompson. After defeating this Clippers team in the first round, right? If they had brought back Paul George, they would have at best been treading water. They would have not they wouldn't have been making a difference, a splash in free agency that would have put them over the edge. But not paying Paul George puts you in even worse of a position. You talk about a team that's flirting with the second apron right now. You talk about a team that, you should, in theory, only be flirting with the second apron if you are a competitive team, you know? But the Clippers are not a competitive team. They sneak into the playoffs. They're a 4 seed in the West, but all their stars are aging. James Harden they bring back on a 2-year, $70 million deal. It's kind of cheap, but you get that contract done kind of cheap because James Harden is older and he is kind of not he isn't the same, not kind of not the same. He isn't the same player that he has been for a couple years now, right? And you see flashes every once in a while, but he can't keep up that play. Kawhi Leonard can't stay healthy. Paul George kind of was the one powering this team, and he is now gone. And that's not to say anything against these other guys, but if they can't stay on the court, they can't stay on the court, right? You're still willing, despite injury issues, to give Kawhi Leonard that contract. And they reluctantly were willing to give it to Paul George, right? And I don't blame blame the Clippers for starting low, right? If you can get Paul George for 2 years, $60 million, you get Paul George for 2 years, $60 million, right? That's a good deal for you as a team and lets you build possibly some success. But he says no, he feels disrespected. He wants more money. As an organization, he is an organization that wants to win, that wants to compete. Why aren't you throwing in a no trade clause? Are you really so sure that you're going to trade, or you're going to have to trade Paul George in the next 3 years, right? You're moving into a new arena. You're clearly trying to be competitive. What does it matter if you can trade every piece but Paul George 2 years from now, right? It's not like you're going to sign him and immediately trade him. This is a signing that would have happened most likely with the mindset that you want to compete. You want to win basketball games, especially, like I said, since they're moving into a new arena. That's like the reason they're not blowing it up right now, or the only logical reason that I can think of for why they're not blowing it up right now, because they're clearly not championship contenders right now. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if they missed the playoffs entirely. They're probably a play-in team right now, with the way that Kawhi Leonard has been available. If Kawhi Leonard is able to go out there and play a full season, maybe not 82 games, that's unrealistic to expect. But maybe Kawhi Leonard goes out there and he gives you 65 games, the minimum to win awards nowadays, right? He goes out and he gives you 65 games. They could sneak into 6th seed, but they're not going to win. They're not going to win the championship, right? This isn't a team that is built to win a championship. They're just trying to compete. They're trying to be a fun team to watch. Step out of the Lakers' shadow. And I don't understand, to be completely honest with you, why they refuse to give him that no trade clause. Because if they're going to do this and trade Paul George at the same time, if they're willing to give him $150 million and say, "Hey, we're going to trade you within 3 years, or we might trade you within 3 years," there's no reason for Paul George to accept that offer. And I think Paul George absolutely made the right decision by deciding to step out of LA, go get his money somewhere else, especially if he's telling the truth, which I have no reason to doubt him on that podcast. If he's telling the truth of how these negotiations went, you know, he hasn't done anything wrong. He's just trying to guarantee that he's not going to get traded after he made this commitment, this sacrifice, this $60 million sacrifice to stay in LA, a team that's, in all honesty, probably not going to win anything with or without Paul George. But I think the Clippers kind of are crazy for not giving him that. Who cares? Who cares if he has a no trade? Just don't trade him. And I doubt they were going to trade him anyway. It's a weird sticking point, but doesn't matter. He moves on to the Philadelphia 76ers. I think that's a better team for him anyway. I mean, if he wants to win a ring, that's going to be a better shot, especially in a weaker Eastern Conference. If they can get past the Celtics, they just the rest of the East shouldn't be that bad. Now, we don't know for sure, but I do think that I do think this is a good fit for Paul George in Philadelphia. So let me know your thoughts if you've seen the clip from the podcast that Paul George went on. I'd love to hear your opinion on this. But in our next segment, we're going to finish up our NBA coverage with some summer league action. We're going to go around the world of the NBA summer league. Right, Zach Edey made his debut last night. The kind of controversial top 10 pick for the Memphis Grizzlies, and he played phenomenally. We'll also talk a little bit about Bronny James, what he's done in his first couple games in the summer league, as well as any other summer league standouts as we prepare for the NBA season that is coming up. So stick around for that. We'll be right back with all of that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back. Excuse me. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the whole saga with Paul George and the Clippers. We also went over the differences of rookie max contracts that have taken place so far in recent memory. Cade Cunningham and Franz Wagner with the Magic and the Pistons. With the Magic and the Pistons, respectively. And in our first segment, we talked all about whether or not this was the best ever This was the best ever Olympic U.S. basketball roster that was put together. But in this segment, we're going to finish up our NBA coverage, talking a little bit about some summer league stats that have been going on. Obviously, the big story of the last day is Zach Edey going off against some starting NBA competition. We'll talk about all of that, what that means for him in his future. Again, it's summer league, so we're going to try not to overreact too much, but we'll talk about that and much more. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of summer league action here, starting off with one of the kind of more controversial picks in the first round of this year. Obviously, he had a lot of discussion around him coming out of Purdue. Zach Edey, drafted 9th overall by the Memphis Grizzlies, has his debut in the summer league against the Utah Jazz, going up against not just normal summer league guys, but Walker Kessler, who's the starting center for the Jazz in his matchup here. You get to see him against a guy who's been one of the best interior defenders in the league the last couple seasons. Obviously, ever since coming into the league, he was part of the Rudy Gobert trade, kind of a 1-for-1 for the Jazz. Not exactly the same, but he's been a great inside presence, and you see Zach Edey go in and out-rebound him. I mean, you look at Zach Edey's stat line, 15 points, 14 rebounds, 4 blocks. Pretty impressive for a debut against some real NBA competition in Walker Kessler. Like I was saying, this is still the summer league, so this isn't going to be the end-all be-all, right? But he made a couple of really, really impressive plays, especially at the end of regulation. Free throw, he fights through 2 guys to get a tip in with less than a second left, able to force the game to overtime, where eventually they do end up losing by 2. But still, it was a very, very impressive first outing for Zach Edey, and he's kind of proving why he does deserve to be a top 10 pick in the NBA. You know, as much as people want to say this was a weaker draft class, there's a lot of guys that have the potential to be great, right? And Zach Edey is one of them. There was always that question of, hey, is he just going to be another Taco Fall, a huge guy that dominates in college but can't translate to the NBA? Zach Edey is a little more than that, and we talked a little bit about that in our pre-draft coverage. He won Best Player in college 2 or 3 years in a row, right? You know, that's not something that they just give out to just a normal big man. It's not something they give out to just any 7'5" guy, right? Zach Edey is big. He's got a little bit of movement. You know, he can defend the pick and roll. It's not going to be, he's not going to be like, Drew Holiday out there being able to get around the pick and roll and everything, but he's defensively already you can see the potential for him to be one of the best rim defenders. Obviously, it's a lot easier when you're 7'5" at this point, but it's really impressive to see him come into the league and not really deal with any growing pains. Now, like I said, I do want to preface this. This is just the summer league. I'm gonna talk about him and his first game, but it's just the summer league. We don't know. Obviously, famously, Victor Wembanyama struggled in the beginning of his career in the summer league, and now look at him, already arguably a top 10 player in the NBA. Clearly, living up to all the hype there. But Zach Edey showing out here is really cool to see. Zach Edey's a guy that a lot of people are doubting that can make the transition, and he's showing that he does have the movement. He does have the ability to run the floor. He's not just kind of stuck under the basket the whole time, and he can be a productive player on offense and defense in a constantly evolving NBA. It's still crazy to me that guys can tower over people in the NBA, and Zach Edey's one of those guys that does it. Obviously, 7'5". But the Grizzlies need that, right? They need a guy to pair with Ja Morant, who, Ja Morant, when healthy, is one of the best players in the entire league, right? If he can stay on the court, you now have a great pick and roll partner in Zach Edey. He's going to clear a lot of space, help Ja break out of those double teams, and make it a lot easier for him to just throw lobs up to a 7'5" guy, right? It's gonna be a lot of fun to see. Uh, I can already picture them being a very very successful duo in the NBA as they get to play together. Now, like I said, summer league, we don't want to overreact too much, but it is really cool to see. We also had some action from Bronny James in the summer league in his first couple games. His first game, he was getting to his spots for he was 2 for 9, 4 points in 21 minutes. In his second game, it was a little more of the same. He was a little more productive offensively, but you can see some of the potential there. He's obviously not as polished as some of these other guys, uh, but if he can work on it, if he can start to knock down his shots, he can be a really productive role player in the NBA. I know he's getting a lot of attention right now because he's Bronny James. He's playing on the same team as his dad, who happens to be LeBron James. If in case you were living under a rock there, but the summer league is a fun place to keep an eye on some of these young rising stars, and I think Zach Edey is going to be really good in the NBA. It's really really cool to see some of these young guys get their first crack against NBA talent. I mean, even going away from the summer league a little bit, Cooper Flag is one of the reserve team members for Team USA. We talked a little bit about that in the first segment, and he's looked really good in the scrimmage the other day. Team USA ended up winning by 1 point, but Cooper Flag was able to hold his own against some of the greatest players in the NBA. Going up against hitting shots over Anthony Davis. That's it's not an easy thing to do. But he looked comfortable. He looked calm, and it's going to be a crazy tank off for him this season. I'm curious to see who ends up getting him because he looks really really good. But anyway, in our our fifth and final segment to close our show today, we're going to move out of the world of basketball. We're going to get into some New York Yankees MLB talk. They've been struggling a lot down the stretch since June 13th, almost a month ago. They've gone 6-16 and fading fast there. So we'll talk all about the New York Yankees, what's been going on with them, and if they can turn it around. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just finished a whole lot of basketball talk. We started off our show answering the question, is this the best U.S. Olympic basketball roster ever? They're a little old. 7 guys are over the age of 30, and because of that, I don't think I can say that with a lot of confidence. But I do see the argument there. This is probably the deepest team that they have ever had. At least in recent memory, in the Olympics. We also talked a little bit about Cade Cunningham getting a massive 5-year, $224 million extension that could be worth up to $269 million with the Pistons, what that means for the future of the Pistons and Cade Cunningham, as well as Paul George and his contract situation with the Clippers. He felt disrespected. There was a great podcast interview clip. Go ahead and check that out if you have not seen it. It was a really interesting insight into the way that NBA negotiations can kind of play out, and that's always interesting to see. We also just finished talking about some Summer League games with Zach Edey going off in his first action, proving that he does belong in the NBA and did deserve to be a top 10 pick in this year's NBA draft. We are going to finish off the show today talking a little bit about baseball, going into the world of the New York Yankees. They have been struggling a little bit, but before we get into that, we do have some breaking news. Breaking news, the All-Star game, which we talked about rosters and snubs, one of those guys got in as part of, reserves players not showing up due to injuries. Reds right-handed pitcher Hunter Green gets in his first All-Star game, as well as Orioles infielder Jordan Westburg. And that was one of those snubs that we pointed out in yesterday's episode. Congratulations to him and Riley Green making their first All-Star games. They absolutely deserves to get in. I do wish that Jake Irvin got in instead of Riley Green, but that's a whole nother discussion. We're here to talk about the Yankees. Before we get into that, though, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Like I was saying, though, we are moving into the world of MLB, and the Yankees have been bad. They came into mid-June, as the best team in baseball, constantly atop of our personal Sports by GSMC podcast, MLB Power Rankings, which comes out every Friday. But they've been slipping. In their last 22 games since June 13th, they have gone 6-16. That's good for the worst record in baseball since that time. Not really a good look for a Yankees team that has aspirations to win the World Series. Now, they're still in a really good spot because they had been the best team in baseball before their little slump here. And it's kind of interesting that their slump kind of coincides with Garrett Cole returning from injury. I wonder if that's a mental thing of, hey, we need to do better. We need to do our best until Garrett Cole can come back. And once he comes back, we can just kind of ride it out. Now, that's a mindset thing. That's not something they'll ever say. That's not something that we can ever know. But maybe mentally, that's what it is. Because baseball, as much of a physical game as it is, it's also a mental game, right? The mentality of baseball is so important when you're talking about players getting in their own head, because you have to be so concentrated, so focused, especially as batters, pitchers, getting past, giving up a hit, giving up a home run, not letting it get to you. But that could absolutely be a part of it. That pitching staff that had been so vaunted, the best pitching staff by ERA in baseball, pre-Garrett Cole, has turned to mush since he came back. Marcus Stroman has collapsed. Luis Gil has collapsed, right? Gil was supposed to be a lock for the All-Star game. He misses out on it because his last 4 starts have been atrocious. 14 ERA in his last couple starts. That's what we talked about in our last episode when we were talking about all-star snubs a little bit. But this is a Yankees team that is powered by Aaron Judge, powered by Juan Soto. They have a lot of holes, right? They were able to be this good because Juan Soto and Aaron Judge combined are good enough to put up 3, 4, 5 runs a game, right? You get some league average guys around them, they'll drive them in, they'll do their job, right? But now that the pitching is giving up 4, 5, 6 runs a game, this is no longer sustainable. We've talked about the weaknesses of this Yankees team a lot. Outside of Judge and Soto, they've got no one that can hit, right? DJ LeMahieu is in a slump. Anthony Volpe is in a slump. Rizzo is in a slump, right? Verdugo, it's been solid, but, he's not the bat you want to rely on, right? This is a team that needs to go out and add at the deadline if they want to be World Series contenders. And this, like we talked about in the beginning of the offseason, their window is closing, right? Garrett Cole is only getting older. Aaron Judge is only getting older. They're already in their mid-30s, these guys, right? Juan Soto is going to be a free agent, and if he doesn't feel like this is a team that he enjoys playing with or is competitive, he's going to walk. Now, that I think is priority number one. Juan Soto, re-signing him if you're the Yankees. And I think the way it's heading right now, he probably will resign and they'll be okay. But in the worst case scenario for the Yankees, if they cannot sign Juan Soto, if for whatever reason he just says, "Hey, New York is great. We don't want to. New York is great, but I don't want to resign you," right? What's that going to look like for them? Are we going back to a wild card team that is just Aaron Judge? That's not a sustainable way to play winning baseball. Eric says a grueling 162 game season. Bad stretches are inevitable in baseball, but I feel like the Yankees always go through this type of baseball play. When will the Yankees make another World Series, right? They haven't been to one since what, 2008, something along those lines. It's been almost 15 years. It's been a very long time since the Yankees made a World Series. And like I was talking about, like you point out, 162 games. A lot of what makes baseball so hard isn't the physicality of it. It's not like football where you're going to get hurt if you keep doing it forever. It's the mental part of it, right? And the mental part is so important, which is why I bring up this stretch kind of coincides with Garrett Cole coming back. And yes, the Yankees the last couple seasons have had their slumps in the second half, but this feels different, right? Because it feels like they got better and with the addition of Garrett Cole, and then immediately their place slipped, right? Because Garrett Cole is probably the best pitcher in baseball, or at least he has been for the last couple of seasons. If you get that back, a perennial Cy Young candidate back, and you get worse, it's not a good look for the future of your organization, right? And I think this is going to make the Yankees miss the playoffs. Absolutely not. I think the Yankees are going to be just fine. I think they'll get the number one wild card slot at the worst, right? I still think that they have a big enough lead that this stretch, this 6-6 seed stretch kind of baseball is not going to last forever. And I think getting to the All-Star break in, just a couple days from now, that's going to be huge for them, right? They're going to be able to recharge, get back in the mental state that they need to keep winning, and then they'll be able to be that Yankees team that they were in the first 2.5 months of this season, right? I do think that they'll be able to turn it around. But the way it looks right now, they need to get their mentals right. And that's really the only thing that I can think of for why this is happening, right? Because baseball is such a mental game. 162 games. Lots of time spent away from home. Lots of time spending with the same guys. And if you don't like them, that's tough. And if things start to go bad, it makes it harder to like them. So, I do think that this Yankees team will rebound. I think this is a very good Yankees team, and I think this Yankees team will be just fine. But it is a little concerning that they can go through a stretch like this. This is not something that you want to happen come playoff time. This is not the kind of mental fortitude. And again, that is just me guessing because because aside from the bats going down, aside from Garrett Cole coming back, nothing really changed about this team, right? They just everyone collectively started playing worse, and that feels like a mentality in the locker room kind of issue. So I think the All Star break is going to do wonders for them. But we will see. Like I said, I think this Yankees team will rebound just fine. But it's definitely concerning that they're capable of going on this stretch. But anyway, thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I will be off for just about the next week and a half. I am going on vacation tonight. I'll be back. I'll be gone from the 10th to the 20th. So whatever day that is, I will be back. I appreciate all of you guys tuning in every single day. And I hope you have a great next couple of weeks, next 10 days. I will be more excited than ever to come back to you, talk more sports on the 20th when I do return. But I hope everybody has a great next couple weeks, a great rest of your day, and I will see you when I come back. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go.